over fields of green, remembering the faces, the moments unseen, the hands that built a dynasty, the vision in their eyes, echoes in the auction barn beneath an endless sky. This is the bovine, turn the volume high, for the icons of the ages that never will die. From the show ring thunder to the quiet strength they knew, hear their stories now, coming right on through.
So picture this. It is a freezing morning in late 1850s Massachusetts.
Oh man, New England winters are brutal.
Right. The ground is literally as hard as iron.
Mm-hmm.
And you have this group of men on horseback riding up the lane to Winthrop Chenery's Belmont farm.
And I'm guessing they aren't there for a friendly visit.
No, absolutely not. They walk straight past the farmhouse, and you can see their breath just like pluming in the winter air.
Yeah.
They're carrying rifles, and they're heading directly toward his barn to execute his entire livelihood.
It is an absolutely chilling scene, especially for anyone listening to this who has ever, poured their life into a herd of animals.
Every farmer's worst nightmare. Right?
Exactly. The reason those men from the Commonwealth were there with rifles was this disease called Rinderpest, the cattle plague.
The cattle plague.
Yeah. And the state authorities, they were not taking any chances.
Welcome back to the Bovine Podcast. Today, we are sharing a story that, honestly, it just stopped us in our tracks when we read it.
Oh, completely. It's wild.
We are doing a deep dive into some incredible historical source material. Primarily, this piece of research titled Architects of the Black and White Cow.
It's such a great title.
It really is. And we are going on this journey into the absolute bedrock of the dairy industry.
This is the kind of conversation that reminds you why you got into dairy in the first place.
Yeah, for sure.
It's not just a dry timeline of dates and names. It is a story about the foundation of literally everything we do today on the farm.
Exactly. We are looking at the actual human beings behind the braid.
Yeah.
Like their crushing setbacks, the massive gambles they took, and this is the craziest part, the pure sensory intuition that built the black and white cows standing in your barn right now.
It's amazing to think about.
But to really understand the magnitude of this, we have to go back to that freezing morning in Massachusetts and those rifles.
Right. So Rinderpest is something we don't really think about much today.
No, not at all.
Because, it was globally eradicated in 2011.
Right.
But back then, it was a guaranteed death sentence.
What exactly did it do to the animals?
It was this highly contagious viral disease. It caused severe fever, oral erosions, diarrhea, and just massive internal hemorrhaging.
Oh, that's horrific.
It really was. The mortality rate in naive populations was just devastating. And somehow, this virus had managed to slip into Winthrop Chenery's prized little group of imported Dutch black and white cattle.
So the state government steps in.
Yeah, they realized that if this plague got out into the general, native cattle population of New England, it would basically collapse the entire agricultural economy.
Right.
So they issued the order. The whole lot had to be destroyed immediately.
And out of that entire herd, the state spared exactly one animal, just one young bull named Dutchman 37.
Just one. Wow.
Yeah, it was this last desperate attempt to salvage something from the wreckage. And we really need to focus on the physical and emotional reality of Winthrop Chenery in that moment.
Put yourself in his boots for a second.
Exactly. The historical accounts describe him as this massive, imposing figure. He was 6'4" and 300 pounds.
A literal giant for the 1850s.
A giant. And this giant is forced to stand there in the cold, completely helpless.
Yeah.
He just has to listen to the crack of the rifles, watching these incredibly unique animals hit the dirt one by one.
And the thing is, he knew exactly what he was losing.
He knew their potential.
Right. He had already seen enough of these Dutch cows to know they were entirely different from the native stock everyone else was dealing in.
How different are we talking?
Well, to give you an idea of what was bleeding out in the snow that morning, one of his cows from a later shipment, an animal named Texelar 51, would go on to produce over 76 pounds of milk in a single day in 1865.
76 pounds. In 1865.
I know. So Chenery wasn't just losing his property. He was watching an unprecedented leap in agricultural potential being erased right in front of his eyes.
And here is where the story takes a turn that honestly defines the rest of dairy history.
This is the crazy part.
Nobody actually wrote down what Chenery said while those rifles were firing. We don't have a record of his exact words.
Probably a lot of cursing.
I mean, you would assume. But the official records show us something even more powerful. On the exact same day that his cattle were condemned and shot, he sent word back across the Atlantic Ocean to Holland.
To order another shipment.
Yes, on the same day.
That one action tells you everything you need to know about the mentality of the people who built this breed.
Okay, wait, let's look at this critically, though. Because when I read that in the sources, my first reaction wasn't like admiration.
What was it?
My first reaction was, is this guy insane? I mean, is that actually grit or is that just reckless gambling?
It sounds reckless for sure.
Right. He just watched an incurable, highly contagious plague wipe out an astronomical investment. The state literally just executed his property.
And he throws more money at it.
Throwing more money across the ocean that exact same afternoon sounds financially suicidal. Why double down right then and there?
It looks suicidal until you look at the macroeconomics of the mid-19th century American farm economy.
Okay, break that down for me.
Well, Chenery wasn't crazy. He was actually one of the few people who clearly saw the writing on the wall. Up until the mid-1800s, the East Coast, specifically places like New York State, was the breadbasket.
Right, because of the Erie Canal.
Exactly. The canal had essentially turned New York into this massive grain corridor, but as the frontier pushed westward toward Ohio and the Midwest, farmers out there had this deep virgin topsoil.
So they could grow it cheaper.
Vastly cheaper. They could produce grain way cheaper than the farmers in the East, whose soils were already starting to deplete after generations of farming.
This is the post-Civil War grain crash, right?
Yep. After the Civil War, Eastern grain prices just sagged heavily. Suddenly, you have this entire region of farmers realizing that growing wheat and oats just isn't going to pay the bills anymore.
They couldn't compete.
They couldn't compete with the West on grain at all. So dairying was starting to look like the only viable frontier for survival in the East.
But there was a problem with that.
A massive biological hurdle. The American dairy cow of that era was fundamentally a compromise.
A compromise. I love how the sources put that. Break that down biologically, because I think we take for granted what a specialized dairy cow actually is today.
Oh, totally.
What were these farmers actually milking in the 1850s and 60s?
The typical animal on an American farm back then was a shorthorn, or, some local muddy mix of native breeds.
It's a mutt, basically.
Pretty much. They were what we call dual-purpose animals. The expectation of the era was that a cow had to be a generalist.
She had to do a bit of everything.
Right. She had to be heavy and blocky enough so that her steer calves could be yoked up to pull a heavy wagon through the mud.
Wow. Pulling wagons.
Yeah. And she needed to carry enough flesh so that when her productive life was over, she had significant butcher value. And, oh, by the way, she needed to give enough milk to fill a pail for the family.
Maybe make a little butter to trade at the mercantile.
Exactly.
So she's a biological jack of all trades, but a master of none. If we look at the metabolism of a dual-purpose shorthorn, it's a biological compromise.
It just splits it.
If a farmer puts high-energy feed into that native cow, her body doesn't know exactly what to do with it. Half that energy gets shunted into building muscle and laying down fat on her back.
Right, and maybe only half of it goes toward milk synthesis in the udder.
Exactly. As the markets changed and grain farming collapsed, Eastern farmers couldn't survive on a cow that split her energy 50-50.
They needed a specialized metabolic engine.
A machine.
They needed an animal that if you fed her a pound of high-quality grain, she shunted almost 100% of that energy directly to the udder.
The sources describe what they needed so vividly. They were looking for a big, true dairy cow with a stomach like a cement mixer.
And an udder to match.
Yes. They didn't need a do-everything ox anymore. They needed a fermentation vat on 4 legs that could convert massive amounts of rough forage into milk at a commercial scale.
And Winthrop Chenery knew that the Dutch had already built her.
Right, over in Europe.
For centuries, over in the low-lying regions of Friesland and North Holland, Dutch farmers had been dealing with very different economics.
They weren't pulling wagons through the frontier.
Exactly. They had lush, wet pastures, and they had been selectively breeding big, deep-bodied black and white cows that were just absolute milk factories.
They only cared about cheese and butter.
Those Dutch cows could absolutely obliterate anything in America when it came to pounds of milk on a 7 or 30-day test.
Yeah.
That is why Chenery doubled down.
He saw the pivot.
He knew the American agricultural economy was pivoting to dairy, and he knew he had the sole biological key to unlocking that new economy.
Which brings us to one of the most quirky, almost unbelievable historical accidents I have ever come across.
Oh, this is my favorite part.
It's a detail that changed the branding of the entire global dairy industry.
It really is a fascinating testament to how fragile history can be. So Chenery gets his new shipment in 1861.
The one he ordered on the day of the massacre.
Yep. A bull and 4 cows that managed to escape disease and make it across the ocean. He anchors his new herd with that surviving bull from the executed herd, Dutchman 37. Now, in all of his own personal catalogs, in his letters to other farmers, Chenery always referred to his animals as Dutch cattle.
Which makes sense. They were from North Holland.
Right. But in 1864, he writes this long, detailed article for the U.S. Department of Agriculture to promote the breed.
Just doing some marketing.
And in that manuscript, he quotes an academic, a Professor T. Lowe, who had written about the Dutch or Holstein breed of cattle in Europe.
So the word Holstein was literally just buried in a quote he was referencing.
Exactly. It was just in quotation marks. He sends this handwritten manuscript off to Washington, D.C.
Oh, no.
And somewhere in the depths of a government editing room, a bureaucrat is reviewing the text. Somehow, through a total editing typo, the word Holstein drifts out of the quotation marks.
It's capitalized.
It gets capitalized and it gets slapped right into the main heading of the official government document.
I just have to pause and marvel at that. I mean, imagine dedicating your entire life to this.
It's wild.
You risk your family fortune. You suffer the absolute trauma of the state, literally executing your herd in the snow. You double down. You import and champion these Dutch cattle, only to have some random Washington bureaucrat with a heavy pen accidentally rename your entire life's work.
And the crazy part is, it stuck. By the time the first official herd book was printed in 1872, the name Holstein had become the accepted American terminology.
Did the Dutch know about this?
Oh, they found out. Back in Europe, a prominent Dutch agricultural scientist named G.H. Hengeveld got wind of this.
I bet he was thrilled.
He actually fired off an angry letter to the Americans pointing out that true Holstein cattle, which originated in the Schleswig-Holstein region of what is now Germany, were a completely different type of animal.
So he was insulted?
Deeply offended. He hated that these superior Friesland and North Holland animals were being credited to a German region.
How did Chenery react to the Dutch getting so angry at him?
He tried to defend himself. He wrote back saying that he used the word Dutch in his original draft and blamed the Washington officials entirely for the blunder.
But he didn't fix it.
No, crucially, he never actually went to war to change it back. It was just too late. The literature had already been printed.
Because of that one casual typo in a government report, the word Holstein ended up on millions and millions of ear tags.
On milk cartons.
In dictionaries around the world today. It's almost comical.
It is. But, while the name was a historical accident, the genetic impact was highly intentional. Chenery proved the concept.
He proved they could survive here.
He proved these massive Dutch cattle could survive the harsh New England winters, that they could adapt to American forage, and that they wouldn't just drop dead from the climate.
Which was a real fear back then.
By 1870, you had herds based on his original Dutch imports operating in New York, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Iowa, all the way out to California.
But Chenery was really just a spark, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was the pioneer. But it was the next wave of men who were going to pour gasoline on the fire and prove what that biological type could actually do at scale.
But to understand how that scaling happened, we really have to talk about causality. We have to look at the sheer financial reality of what it meant to get into this game in the 1860s and 70s.
Wasn't cheap.
Because not just anyone could wake up and decide to import Dutch cattle.
Right. Let's talk about the logistics and the economics. In the mid to late 1800s, it cost roughly $300 a head to purchase and bring cattle over from the Netherlands.
And what does $300 actually mean in 1860s money?
Well, the average working man at that time was making about $1 a day.
$1 a day.
So a single cow cost roughly a year's wages for an average American. Imagine asking a modern dairy farmer to pay $50,000 or $70,000 for a single unproven heifer.
That is insane.
This meant that 99% of American farmers were entirely priced out of the genetic revolution. The only people who could afford to scale this leap were families with deep industrial, mercantile, or generational wealth.
And it wasn't just the purchase price either. We have to talk about the physical logistics of the 1860s transatlantic voyage.
And boats.
Yeah. We're talking about moving 1,500-pound, highly stressed animals across the Atlantic Ocean on wooden ships.
It was a brutal undertaking. These weren't climate-controlled cargo planes. These were late-era sailing ships, or like early coal-belching steamships.
Where did they even put them on the ship?
The cattle were often loaded into cramped holds below deck, or tethered in makeshift stalls on the upper decks where they were exposed to saltwater spray, freezing winds, and the pitching and rolling of the open ocean.
That sounds like a nightmare for the livestock.
And then for the people, you had handlers who had to essentially live with the cows for weeks at sea. They were pitching out wet manure from pitching decks, trying to keep the animals standing during gales.
And feeding them.
Feeding them dry hay that had to be hauled on board in massive quantities. The threat of pneumonia, seasickness, and broken legs was just constant.
If a ship goes down, you lose everything.
If a ship hit a major storm and went down, or if disease broke out in the stifling lower decks, you lost a fortune overnight. There was no maritime insurance policy covering the genetic potential of a cow.
Which perfectly explains how a guy like Gerrit Miller ends up entering the story. Because Miller represents that exact class of generational wealth required to take on this level of logistical nightmare.
Oh, absolutely.
I love the image of this guy.
Oh.
It's the late 1860s. And Miller is a student at Harvard.
Harvard, man.
He's studying science and liberal arts, and he's actually captaining what is credited as the very first organized football team in the United States.
Wait, really? That's wild.
Yeah. He's this wealthy, athletic college kid. And when he takes walks out from Cambridge for exercise, he keeps passing Winthrop Chenery's farm in Belmont.
And he sees the cows.
He keeps seeing these massive, deep-ribbed, black and white cows.
And they make such a profound impression on him that he goes home to Peterborough, New York, and convinces his father, who was a prominent and wealthy figure, to let his brother, Charles Dudley Miller, go all the way to Holland.
To buy some of their own.
Yes. And Charles's journey is straight out of an adventure novel. He travels to a cattle market at Wiener in West Friesland, right at the very northern tip of the Netherlands.
Just going straight to the source.
He buys 4 head, a bull named Hollander, and 3 cows named Crown Princess, Dowager, and Fraulein.
Great names.
He shepherds them onto the ship, endures the weeks-long ocean crossing, hits the port in New York, and then loads them onto a rail car. They take the train as far as Canastota, New York.
But there were no trucks back then.
Right. So finally, because there was no trucking infrastructure, he physically drives these immensely valuable animals on foot down an old wooden plank road all the way to the Miller family farm in Peterborough.
That shipment in 1869 was only the 3rd pure Dutch shipment to the United States.
Incredible.
Miller establishes his farm, names it Kriemhild, after a princess of Dutch legend, and immediately sets to work, proving that these animals weren't just like exotic lawn ornaments for a wealthy family.
He wanted to prove they were commercial powerhouses.
And boy, did they prove it. This is where we transition to the measurable performance. This is where the records start to absolutely shatter the ceiling of what the American agricultural sector thought a bovine was capable of doing.
The numbers are staggering.
Let's look at the cow named Dowager, one of those original 3 females Charles brought over. In 1871, Dowager completes what is recognized as the first full 365-day annual milk record in the United States.
What did she make?
She gave 12,681 pounds and 8 ounces of milk.
To understand the shockwave that number sent through the industry, you really have to understand the baseline.
Right. Context is everything.
Miller wrote a letter to another Holstein pioneer explaining that back in 1868, just 3 years prior, a native cow that gave 6,000 pounds a year was considered exceptional.
6,000 was the ceiling.
She was the pride of the county at 6,000. Dowager more than doubled the exceptional standard.
Okay, wait, hold on. Dowager makes 12,600 pounds. Today, a good commercial Holstein herd averages 25,000 to 30,000 pounds.
Easy.
So 12,000 pounds sounds low to modern ears. But we have to look at the biology and the husbandry of 1871. How exactly did she make 12,000 pounds back then?
That is the most crucial context. She achieved that record on 2-a-day milking, entirely by hand.
Entirely by hand.
And look at her diet. During the entire summer, June, July, and August, she received absolutely zero grain. None. She was strictly on pasture. For the rest of the year, her grain ration was incredibly rudimentary. It was mostly just wheat bran, which is a byproduct of milling flour.
So she wasn't getting a modern TMR.
She didn't have a modern, total mixed ration, perfectly balanced for amino acids, bypass protein, and energy. She had grass, hay, and bran. And on that diet, she hit 50 pounds of mill in a single day, twice in one lactation.
And we also had to paint the picture of how these records were actually verified, because there was no automated testing.
There was no DHIA technician showing up with a laptop and digital meters.
Testing a cow for a full 365 days in the 1870s was an act of brutal physical endurance for the farmer.
It meant you were up at all hours of the night in the dead of winter.
Milking into tin pails.
You were milking by hand into tin pails. You then had to carry that warm, frothy milk over to a mechanical scale in the milk house.
And write it all down.
You're reading the hash marks on the scale by the flickering dim light of a kerosene lantern, and you are writing every single figure down by hand in ink in a ledger book. Every single milking for a year.
The sheer labor required to prove the worth of this breed is staggering.
But Miller wasn't the only one pushing these limits. Down by Onondaga Lake near Syracuse, you had Wing and Judson Smith.
Oh, the Smiths and Powell guys.
Yeah, their origin story is fascinating because they weren't even dairymen originally. They were nurserymen.
Like growing trees.
Yeah. They ran massive fruit tree and orchard operations, and honestly, they really just wanted cattle for the manure to fertilize their trees.
That's hilarious. They just wanted the fertilizer.
But they keep hearing these wild rumors about a man over in Madison County with these Dutch Frisian cows that are completely blowing past the local milking shorthorns.
Because they go check it out.
So they drive over to Peterborough, they take one look at Miller's herd, and they buy a bull and 4 cows.
And I bet they saw the results fast.
Once they get them home and see the volume of milk in the pail, they realize 2 things very quickly. 1, this breed is an absolute biological goldmine. And 2, Gerrit Miller is making a fortune selling the offspring.
So they decide to cut out the middleman entirely. They team up with their family to form Smiths and Powell, and they start importing directly from Holland. And the scale at which they operate is hard to comprehend.
It's massive.
We said earlier it cost $300 a head. Smiths and Powell eventually imported 1,293 head over the years.
That is roughly 1/6 of all the pure Dutch Holsteins ever imported to North America. They were dropping the equivalent of millions of dollars into ocean freight.
But they weren't just bulk importers moving cattle like widgets. They were master marketers, and they were obsessed with rigorous record keeping.
They threw themselves into what became advanced register testing.
At their lakeside stock farm, they were running official, supervised records on 36 cows a year.
Again, picture that labor. Testing 36 cows on rigorous, multi-day, supervised tests, weighing every drop of milk, keeping the ledgers.
And what about butterfat?
Well, keep in mind, the Babcock test, which is the chemical test used to determine butterfat percentage in milk, wasn't invented by Dr. Stephen Babcock until 1890.
So how did they prove it?
In the 1870s and 80s, if you wanted to prove how much butter a cow made, you couldn't just take a vial of milk to a lab. You had to physically churn the milk from that specific cow.
Oh my gosh.
You had to skim the cream by gravity, ripen it, put it in a wooden dash churn, physically agitate it until the butter broke, wash the butter, salt it, and weigh the actual physical block of butter.
That was called a churn test.
Doing that for 36 cows a year is a staggering logistical feat.
But it paid off because they built the legendary Netherland family line, known for immense physical size and heavy production. And they brought over a cow named Aggie, who we have to talk about.
Aggie's an absolute legend of the breed.
Aggie is the cow that shattered expectations all over again.
She goes on a yearly test in 1880 alongside another outstanding cow named Aegis. Early in the lactation, Aegis hits 82 pounds of milk in a single day.
Which is huge.
At the time, farmers reading that in the agricultural journals must have thought 82 pounds was the biological limit of the bovine species.
But Aggie tops her.
Aggie hits 84 pounds. By the end of the 365 days, Aegis makes a massive 16,823 pounds.
Aggie.
Aggie finishes at 18,004 pounds. She becomes the very first cow in the United States to cross the 18,000-pound mark in a single year.
And Smith & Powell didn't stop there. 5 years later, they imported a cow named Clothilde, who in 1885 produced 26,021 pounds of milk,
Getting a world record.
proving definitively that these large-framed Holsteins could produce so much volume that they could actually compete with the high-fat Jerseys when it came to total pounds of butter produced in a year.
The numbers just kept climbing as these early breeders started to refine their husbandry and their stock. Over in Walworth, New York, you had Theron G. Yeomans.
Theron Yeomans is a fascinating character study.
He really is.
To give you a sense of his personality, the sources share a famous story about him. A young boy once asked Yeomans what kind of apples were the best to plant in an orchard. Yeomans told him that if he were to plant 999 trees, every single one of them would be a Baldwin apple tree.
He liked Baldwins.
The boy asks, well, what if you planted 1,000th tree? And Yeomans just laughs and says, son, if I were to plant one more tree, that tree would be a Baldwin also.
I love that anecdote. It shows exactly who he was, a man entirely obsessed with consistency, uniformity, and absolute unwavering reliability.
If he found something that worked perfectly, and he saw no reason to deviate.
Exactly. And he applied that exact same rigid, exacting standard to his cattle breeding. He traveled to Holland himself, and he handpicked his cows, insisting on perfect type, perfect udders, and perfect black and white color markings.
He imported a cow he named Princess of Wayne.
Under his rigorous management, she would eventually produce 113 pounds in a single day.
113 pounds.
And an astonishing 29,008 pounds in a year.
Okay, I have to stop you again. You're telling me Theron Yeomans got 29,000 pounds of milk out of a cow in the 1880s? I know dairy farmers today, listening to this deep dive right now, who work incredibly hard to hit a 29,000-pound herd average with computer-formulated TMR mixers, independent nutritional consultants, and climate-controlled, tunnel-ventilated barns.
It seems impossible.
How is that physically possible on an 1880s diet and in an 1880s barn?
It's a great question, and it speaks to a level of animal husbandry that is almost a lost art today. To push a cow to 29,000 pounds of milk without modern nutritional science required an intense, almost fanatical level of individualized care.
What were they doing differently?
First, they were milking these high-producing cows 3, sometimes 4 times a day, every 6 hours around the clock by hand. You had men practically living in the box stall with the cow.
What were they feeding her to fuel that kind of production?
Since they didn't have modern extruded bypass proteins or scientifically chopped corn silage, they relied on highly digestible, water-rich root crops.
Like beets.
Yeah, they fed massive quantities of mangel-wursels, which are these huge, heavy forage beets. They would hand slice baskets of these beets to give the cow energy and hydration.
Wow, hand slicing beets.
They would feed oil meal, oats, and bran. Sometimes they would even boil or steam the grain to make it more digestible in the rumen.
Steaming the grain.
They would groom the cow daily with curry combs to stimulate blood flow. They would blanket her in the winter to ensure she didn't waste a single calorie of feed on shivering to maintain body heat. Everything was optimized by pure, painstaking human labor.
It is an incredible testament to their dedication.
Yeah.
And it makes me want to slow the pace down for a minute and talk about a man who embodied that superhuman level of animal husbandry in a way that just breaks your heart.
And then lifts it right back up.
Yes. I want to talk about Henry Stevens of Brookside Farm down in Lacona, New York.
Henry Stevens is a legendary figure. If Miller was the master cowman who proved the breed, and Smiths and Powell were the massive engine builders who scaled the imports, Henry Stevens was the man who built the great sire lines.
He's the bull man.
He was the bull man.
He started relatively small. He bought just 2 cows from Gerrit Miller for $300 apiece. But he had an absolute genius for genetics. He eventually built his entire breeding program around 4 foundational cows.
Dacol II, Netherland Hengerveld, Belle Korndijk, and Helena Burke.
Those 4 names are absolute royalty in the Holstein world. The sons and grandsons of those 4 cows went on to build the most influential sire lines of the early 20th century.
Dacol II alone is considered one of the great cornerstones of the breed.
But the twist in Henry Stevens' story, the thing that elevates his legacy into something almost mythic, is how he achieved his greatest success.
It's unbelievable.
Right in the middle of his life, at the height of his breeding program, an illness struck him. It severely affected his optic nerves, and he completely lost his sight.
It went totally blind.
And logically, this is where you expect the story to end. A livestock breeder who cannot see his animals. A man whose entire livelihood depends on visually assessing the conformation, the dairy character, and the udder attachments of a cow.
You'd think he'd have to sell out.
It's over. Right. But he doesn't quit. The historical sources describe visitors coming to Brookside Farm and watching Henry Stevens walking down the cow alley.
He would have one hand on the halter rope.
And then he would let go, and he would let his fingers do the judging. I want you to really sit with this image. A completely blind man in a late 1800s dairy barn, standing next to a 1,500-pound animal.
He was literally reading the cows like Braille.
Explain the physical mechanics of that. What exactly is a blind man feeling for that tells him whether a cow is a genetic champion or a cull?
It all comes back to the biological function we discussed earlier. The cow as a metabolic engine. Stevens would run his hands over the cow's frame to assess her dairy character.
What's the first thing he feels?
He would feel the withers, the top of the shoulder blades. In a beef animal, the withers are thick and round, padded with meat. In a true dairy cow, the withers should be sharp and angular, proving she is shunting her energy to milk, not muscle. He would run his hands down her back, feeling the chine and the loin for strength and straightness, which indicates a strong skeletal frame capable of carrying heavy weight.
And the sources specifically mention him feeling the spring of rib. What does that tell him?
The spring of rib is critical. He would press his hands against the cow's barrel, her rib cage. He wasn't just feeling bone, he was assessing the exact size and shape of her fermentation vat.
The rumen capacity.
Exactly. A cow with ribs that spring out wide and deep has massive rumen capacity. It means she has the physical internal space to consume and process 80, 90, or 100 pounds of forage a day.
A narrow cow just can't do it.
A narrow, flat-ribbed cow simply doesn't have the digestive real estate to make 20,000 pounds of milk. Stevens could feel that volume with his bare hands.
And the udder.
He would kneel down and test the pliability of the udder. A meaty udder might look big, but it's full of useless fat and connective tissue.
It looks good until you milk it.
Right. A truly great udder, once it's milked out, feels soft, pliable, and collapsed, like a soft leather glove. It means it's packed entirely with secretory tissue, the cells that actually synthesize milk.
The sources even say he was so sensitive that he would trace the hair on the cow's hide to feel the exact point where the rougher black hair gave way to the softer white hair.
He knew the precise color markings of his animals without ever seeing them.
Gives me chills. His sons, who had perfect vision, trusted their father's blind hands more than they trusted their own eyes.
That's incredible trust.
When it came time to make the massive financial decisions of which heifers to keep as the future of the herd and which bulls to sell off to other breeders, they deferred entirely to his touch.
And the historical records back up that faith completely.
The genetic lines he selected while blind went on to dominate the breed. By the 1920s, Brookside Farm was widely considered the most influential Holstein farm of the decade.
It really forces you to question what we've gained and what we might have lost with all our modern technology.
How so?
We get so caught up today in genomic tests and linear evaluations and computer-generated mating programs. And here was Henry Stevens, operating in total darkness, feeling the spring of a rib and fundamentally changing the trajectory of global agriculture.
These men possessed an intrinsic tactile understanding of the bovine form that bordered on the magical.
And we see that magic not just in careful selection, but in these moments of pure serendipity that defined the breed.
Not everything was a calculated scientific decision.
Yeah.
Sometimes it was just dumb luck and personal connections. Take Gerrit Miller's return trip to Holland, for instance.
Oh, the Gerrit Smith story. It's such a great, deeply human farmyard anecdote.
Set the scene.
So it's 1879. Miller is back in Holland looking for more stock, and this local Dutch farmer waves him and his brother over. The farmer says, "Look, I don't have anything for sale, but I know you Americans love cows, and I just want to show you my herd."
Classic farmer move. I'm not selling, but let me show off my stock.
Exactly. So Miller stands there in the pasture, watching the herd graze, politely listening to this farmer talk about his operations and the cheese he's making. But Miller has that eye.
He spots something.
One specific young heifer in the groom catches his attention. She just has this perfect dairy frame, and he decides he absolutely has to have her.
So he starts negotiating.
He starts negotiating. He eventually talks the reluctant farmer into selling her. And it's only after the deal is done and the bill of sale is being written out that the farmer actually formally introduces himself and puts his name on the paper, Gerrit Smit.
And the coincidence of their names is delightful. The Dutch farmer, Gerrit Smit, suggests naming the heifer after his own little daughter, Annetje.
And Miller then smiles, reveals his own name, Gerrit Smith, and mentions that his grandmother and his sister were both named Anne.
So they register her in the herd book under the name Nanny Smit.
Yeah.
She comes to America, she crosses the ocean, she thrives, and she heads the 2-year-old class at the 1880 New York State Fair.
And beyond the show ring, she becomes this crucial, foundational piece of the Johanna root branch of the Holstein family tree.
It's a powerful reminder that beneath all the massive production numbers, the advanced register ledgers, and the million-dollar modern industries, this breed was built on personal, serendipitous connections between farmers standing in muddy pastures across an ocean.
And sometimes those serendipitous moments or historical accidents created entire sub-industries that exist today.
I want to talk about George E. Brown of Smithville, Ontario, and the birth of a controversy that caused an absolute uproar.
You're talking about the red gene.
Yes. So George E. Brown imported cows from Holland, and he sold a very expensive, well-bred bull to a farmer in Norfolk County.
Okay.
The farmer takes the bull home, breeds his black and white cows, waits 9 months for the calves to drop, and when the very first calf hits the straw, it is red and white.
And you have to understand the mindset of the American and Canadian breeders at that time. To them, the word Holstein meant black and white, period.
That was the brand.
That was the hallmark of purity. If it wasn't black and white, it wasn't a Holstein.
The farmer was absolutely disgusted. You can just hear the guy complaining in the laneway to his neighbors, feeling like he got completely ripped off by the importer.
He probably thought he was sold a crossbreed, maybe something tainted with a red milking shorthorn or an Ayrshire.
But he wasn't ripped off.
Yeah.
It was pure biology at work. We need to explain the genetics of the recessive red coat color because it explains so much about early breeding.
In cattle, the gene for a black hair coat is dominant. The gene for a red hair coat is recessive.
So black always wins out if it's there.
Right. In Holland, the Dutch farmers historically didn't care nearly as much about coat color as the Americans did. They just wanted the cow that gave the most milk. So if a great cow happened to be red, they kept her. This meant the red gene was hidden, floating around in the Dutch population.
So if a bull is black, but he carries one dominant black gene and one recessive red gene, he looks perfectly black and white to the naked eye.
Exactly. And if you mate that carrier bull to a cow who is also black, but who also silently carries the recessive red gene, the laws of Mendelian genetics dictate that there is a 25% chance that the calf will inherit the red gene from both parents.
And when that happens, the calf is born red and white.
And back in the late 1800s, before they understood DNA, those red calves were considered a nuisance. They were viewed as a flaw, a stain on the pedigree.
What did they do with them?
Many breeders would quietly knock those red calves on the head and bury them behind the barn so word wouldn't get out that their bull threw red calves.
Oh, wow. They just got rid of them.
But that very same red gene, which survived hidden in the genome despite the breeder's best efforts to eradicate it, is now the basis for the entire red and white Holstein segment around the world today.
It's a massive global market, all stemming from genes that early farmers considered a disaster.
Which brings up a really important turning point in our narrative. We've talked about these massive importations, the serendipity, the early milk records, the individual characters like Miller, Stevens, and Yeomans.
But things started to shift.
There is a distinct moment in the 1880s and 90s when a profound biological and structural shift occurs in America. This is the moment the Holstein stopped being viewed as just a foreign novelty, a weird Dutch cow for rich hobbyists, and became a structured, unified, self-sustaining breed.
What exactly triggered that shift? I mean, was it just the sheer volume of milk they were proving on these churn tests? Did the numbers just overwhelm the skeptics?
The milk records were the undeniable proof that won over the commercial dairymen, but the shift was deeply structural and genetic. These pioneering breeders, Miller, Smithson Powell, Stevens, Yeomans, they realized they couldn't just keep importing from Holland forever.
The well was going to run dry.
Eventually, the Dutch government clamped down on exports, and the Americans realized they had to build their own genetic engine. They stopped just importing, and they started organizing.
They formed the national associations, they published the official herd books, they instituted the advanced register testing to weed out the poor performers.
Yes, but more importantly, they started building sire stacks and developing cow families with a deliberate, long-term biological blueprint. And they did this through a very specific breeding strategy.
Line breeding.
Line breeding.
I want to push back on that, or at least get you to clarify for the listener. When we talk about breeding closely related animals, people immediately think of inbreeding, which usually results in genetic disasters.
Low fertility, compromised immune systems, lethal recessive mutations coming to the surface.
Exactly. How did they line breed without ruining the very cattle they were trying to build?
It's a vital distinction. Inbreeding is mating very closely related individuals, like a brother to a sister or a father to a daughter. As you said, that rapidly concentrates negative recessive genes and causes inbreeding depression.
So what's line breeding?
Line breeding, on the other hand, is a much more sophisticated, careful strategy. It involves breeding animals that are related, but further back in the pedigree, specifically attempting to concentrate the genes of one truly exceptional ancestor.
So trying to double up on the genes of a matriarch like de Colsecond.
Exactly. They would take a grandson of de Colsecond and breed him to a granddaughter of de Colsecond through a different sire line. They were weaving an incredibly tight genetic web.
They were sharing genetics between farms.
They were pulling a Netherland bull from Smiths and Powell and using him on an Aggie cow. They were pulling a Brookside bull from Henry Stevens and using him in Gerrit Miller's Peterborough herd.
Cross-pollinating.
They cross-pollinated their best genetics, carefully concentrating the traits for massive rumen capacity, high milk volume, and udder quality, while avoiding the extreme closeness that causes genetic collapse.
They essentially locked in the foundation. They crystallized the genome.
That's a perfect way to phrase it. They crystallized the genome. Everything that happened in the 20th and 21st centuries, every world record broken, every genomic leap made today rests entirely on that specific, tight genetic web they wove in the late 1800s.
They provided the clay that every modern breeder is still sculpting.
Exactly.
So what does all this mean as time marches on? Because sadly, time is absolutely ruthless. We transition into what the sources call the ripple effect, and there is a very somber, reflective tone to this part of the history.
Time is incredibly rough on buildings, and it's rough on people.
The physical empires these men built did not last forever. Let's look at the Powell brothers. We haven't touched on them deeply yet, but down in Pennsylvania, they operated a massive outfit called Shadeland Farm.
Shadeland Farm was an agricultural empire of the highest order. At its peak, Shadeland was basically its own self-sustaining town.
A whole town.
They were running 1,500 head of elite livestock. They had their own dedicated post office. They had their own Wells Fargo Express office just to handle the financial transactions.
That's insane.
The Pennsylvania Railroad literally built a dedicated siding right onto their property so that rail cars could pull off the main line, roll up to the barn doors, and load or unload cattle directly from the stables.
It sounds indestructible, but they made a fatal miscalculation.
They did. The Powell brothers banked heavily on cattle, but they banked even more heavily on the horse market. They bred massive draft horses, Clydesdales, and Percherons to pull plows, and they bred fast road trotters and Kentucky thoroughbreds for transportation and sport.
But the machine age arrived.
As the early 1900s dawned, Henry Ford started rolling Model Ts off the assembly line. The first gasoline tractors started dragging plows across the fields, replacing muscle with internal combustion.
And the Powells refused to pivot.
They stubbornly clung to their buggies, their draft horses, and their thoroughbreds. They believed machines were a passing fad, or at least that high-quality horses would always hold their value.
That stubbornness broke them financially.
And on top of that massive economic shift, profound tragedy struck the family directly.
The history books show they lost sons to the trenches of the First World War. And then, just as the war ended, the devastating 1918 influenza pandemic swept through the globe, claiming more family members.
The combination of the changing agricultural economy and the decimation of the family line was too much. The brothers died in reduced circumstances.
By 1923, this massive, bustling livestock village, the post office, the rail siding, the grand barns, was sold off.
It eventually ended up in the hands of a developer, and those incredible physical structures simply vanished from the earth.
It's heartbreaking. And it wasn't just Shadeland. Up in Peterborough, New York, the Smith family's mansion house met a tragic end.
That was an incredible 28-room architectural marvel that anchored a 500,000-acre empire.
It caught fire and burned completely to the ground in March of 1936. Gerrit S. Miller, the very same guy who, as a college student, walked out from Cambridge to see Winthrop Chenery's cows and started his own revolution, was still alive when the mansion house burned.
But the fire broke his spirit.
The sources note that he seemed to lose heart after seeing that physical anchor destroyed, and he died a year later at the age of 92.
Brookside Farm, where Henry Stevens judged cattle in the dark, eventually went quiet. The Stevens family is gone from the dairy forefront. The blind hands that felt the ribs of the future are dust.
If you drive around these areas today, Madison County, Onondaga County, Crawford County, most of the big sweeping dairy barns from that era have either collapsed under the weight of winter snows, or they've been remodeled into machine sheds or rustic wedding venues.
You might see an old farm name on a rusted historical marker or a road sign, but the physical empires are gone.
If this were a story about real estate or architecture or even just family fortunes, it would be a profound tragedy. A story of empires rising and turning to ash.
But this is dairy history.
And dairy history is fundamentally different. The monuments that these men built aren't made of brick or wood or slate tile. They are made of flesh and blood, and they are very much alive today.
That is the pivot right there, the living legacy. Because when you open up a modern genomic proof sheet today, whether you're farming in Canada, the United States, Europe, or Australia, and you trace the lineage of your cows back through the generations, your jaw will hit the floor.
The genetic reality of what these men accomplished is almost difficult to comprehend.
Let's lay out the facts for the listener. Let's trace the lines. Remember Decal II, the cow that Henry Stevens built his Brookside herd around in the 1880s?
Yes, the cornerstone.
Holstein historians and geneticists have calculated that her blood is shared in common with roughly 7.2% of the modern General Holstein herd today.
Think about the math on that. One single cow, born in the 1880s, has saturated into 7.2% of the global population of a breed that numbers in the tens of millions.
And it gets deeper. Let's look at the bulls that defined the modern era. Take a legendary 1970s bull like Round Oak Rag Apple Elevation.
He essentially created the modern, tall, dairy-framed Holstein.
If you trace Elevation's maternal line back mother to grandmother to great-grandmother exactly 20 dams back, you land squarely on a cow named Ondine.
Ondine was one of Gerrit Miller's Triple Crown cows, imported in 1879.
Take Hanover Hill Starbuck, the bull that practically built the modern Canadian type. Starbuck traces back to Ondine on his sire's side through Elevation.
But if you trace Starbuck's maternal line, you go straight back to a cow named Johanna, another of Gerrit Miller's prized animals from the Creamhill farm.
As the historical sources point out, you could walk through a Canadian dairy barn in the 1980s, look at a long row of beautiful Elevation and Starbuck daughters chewing their cud, and you wouldn't even realize you were essentially looking at cream-held cows from a century earlier, genetically talking to each other across time.
It's literal genetic time travel. Let's keep going. Walkway Chief Mark.
Yeah.
Massive influence on production traits.
Trace his maternal line back 20 generations and you hit Gortje Ekent, a cow imported by George E. Brown in 1879.
Tamar Blackstar, one of the first $1 million bulls.
Trace him back 20 generations and you land on Fenna, imported in 1878.
Obi Manfred Justice, the bull that redefined health and fitness traits in the genomic era.
He traces 19 generations back to Netherland Jewel, imported by Smiths and Powell in 1882.
And we can't forget Glenridge Citation Roxy. She is officially recognized as the queen of the breed for her unmatched ability to transmit flawless type and longevity.
Her maternal roots go straight back through the generations to cattle imported by B.B. Lord in the 1880s. Every single time you look at the giants of the modern breed, you are looking directly at the hand-picked, heavily scrutinized choices of these 19th century pioneers.
Yeah, this raises an incredibly important point about the nature of their achievement. We mentioned earlier what they didn't have when it came to feed and barns, but look at what they didn't have regarding genetic tools.
They built this living architecture without a single DNA swab.
They didn't have artificial insemination to freeze semen and spread elite genetics globally in a single generation. They had to physically walk a bull over to a cow.
They didn't have embryo transfer or IVF to get 40 calves out of their best cow. They had to wait a year for a single natural calf and pray it was a heifer.
They didn't have linear classification scores or computer-modeled predicted transmitting abilities. They operated purely on handwritten daily milk weights, physical churn tests for butter, the brutal comparison of the county fair show ring, and an incredibly deep tactile feel for what a true dairy cow looked and moved like.
Yet, armed with only those rudimentary tools, they successfully built the exact biological foundation that our modern multi-billion-dollar genomic testing charts are constantly analyzing and bragging about today.
That is the synthesis right there.
Yeah.
Every single time a modern Holstein cow walks up to a robotic milker, stands calmly while the laser-guided arm washes her and finds her teats, and the digital meter starts counting out 50, 60, 70 pounds of milk in a single visit, she is doing a job that Winthrop Chenery and Gerrit Miller could never, ever have conceived of in their wildest dreams.
They had no concept of a 40,000-pound herd average. They didn't know what a total mixed ration was.
They didn't breed their cows to comfortably fit into sand-bedded freestalls, or to calmly step onto a 100-stall, 24-hour rotary parlor.
But the physical and metabolic cow that they built in the 1880s is the exact same cow that possesses the skeletal frame, the massive rumen capacity, and the internal metabolic engine to handle those intense modern challenges today.
If you were to somehow magically surgically extract the fingerprints of these specific men from today's Holstein population, if you erased Johanna and Empress and Ondine from the pedigrees, what would happen?
If you took out Aggie and Clofild, if you stripped away Dacol II and Bell Corndyke, the breed that would be left standing in the barn would barely resemble the Holstein we know.
It wouldn't be the same cow.
The incredible forage capacity, the angular dairiness, the sheer unrelenting biological will to produce milk that defines the modern cow simply wouldn't be there. They are, without any exaggeration, the architects of the cow that pays the bills, educates the kids, and sustains the rural economy on dairy farms around the entire world.
All right, I want to bring this right down to the ground. Someone is listening to this deep dive on their tractor right now, or maybe they're washing down the parlor walls or pushing up feed in the freestall barn. What is the one core thing from this incredible historical saga that they should sit with today?
I think the most memorable insight here is about resilience and foresight outlasting physical structures. Barns will eventually fall down or burn or be repurposed. Technological eras will inevitably change, from lantern light and hand milking to glass pipelines to laser-guided robots.
But the cow remains.
But a farmer's intuition, their grit in the face of absolute disaster, and their deep tactile connection to the animal, whether that's fighting off a plague on a freezing morning or judging the spring of a rib by touch in the dark that echoes for centuries. The cows milking in your barn today are literal, breathing, living monuments to farmers who, 150 years ago, simply refused to give up.
I absolutely love that. They are living monuments. And that leads me to leave you with one final thought to mull over as you go about your chores today. We started this deep dive talking about Winthrop Chenery, watching his herd get destroyed, making a split-second decision to double down to order more cows that very day, a decision that changed the world.
A huge gamble.
Today, we're standing on the precipice of a brand new era in agriculture. With CRISPR, gene editing, and advanced cloning, we are looking at genetic leaps that make the 1860s look simple. So ask yourself, who is the Winthrop Chenery of today?
That's a great question.
Are we currently standing in the middle of a new genetic revolution without even realizing it? And the next time you look out across your own herd, ask yourself, what decisions are you making today with your own eyes and your own hands that might still be walking around in a pasture 150 years from now?
That's another story from the Bovine podcast. These are the people building the future of dairy.
Find more at www.thebovine.com. Next time, we're doing a deep dive into the hidden history of the first automated milking pioneers. Subscribe so you don't miss it.
This is the Bovine, turn the volume high. For the icons of the ages that never will die. From the show ring thunder to the quiet strength they knew. Hear their stories now, coming right on through.